Hello, I'm Jo Chamberlain, the Executive Director for the Coastside Land Trust. We have a real treat for you today. One of the world famous ornithologists, Alvaro Jaramillo, is going to present a webinar entitled Birds Around Town. And Alvaro is an incredibly accomplished birder, I guess we could call him, even though he has a much fancier title than that in reality. We've been blessed to have Alvaro living in our community. He's been incredibly helpful to our land trust, and we rely on him a great deal. I'd like Alvaro to take over now. And Alvaro, please tell us a little more about yourself before you start.
Well, thanks, Jo. I'm a birder. I'm a biologist as well. Operate a tour company, sort of bird watching tour company. We do trips internationally and also trips here in the area on boats to go look for whales and the Faroe Islands and so on. I can tell you a little bit about that later. But I've written books about California, birds of Chile and so forth, other things in the past. And, you know, rather than talk more about myself, why don't I talk to you, though, about the local birds? Now, if you've sort of seen, there's a little bit of a structure to this, and there's also kind of free form from these talks, in that there's the neighborhood birds, the backyard birds, and then we're expanding now to the birds around town, a little bit sort of further afield, still around the Half Moon Bay area, and then later we'll be, going to the harbor and other places and so forth, and concentrating on the birds of the Half Moon Bay coastside area. Mentioned last time that we're known for our big waves, we're known for our pumpkins, and in the last 5 to 10 years, we've started really being known for. I've got to say that way back, when I first arrived in California, especially people who were coming from outside of the state to come watch birds, because California is really special for birds, they would go to Monterey or they would go to Point Reyes in Marin. And we were sort of in the middle, and nobody came out here to look for birds. And now that's completely different. Lots of people are coming here, and we're sort of a well-known place for birds. So as I said before, if you live in the Half Moon Bay area and you're interested in birds, you're actually in one of the top places in North America to be watching. Expand a bit to birds that are in the neighborhood. So, there's a chance that some of these you could see every day, depending on where you live, or if you're, from another part of California, some of these things may be more specific to the coast, or they may be common too where you are in California. And these are of some birds that you sort of don't recognize the name or even what the thing looks like. That's a great time to look at the book or look at your app and then try to figure out what these things are, what these names are, and roughly sort of where they're found in general. And you get a broader idea of the birds themselves and how far afield you can find them, and if they're sort of regionally special or they're birds that are, found all over the continent. So here we have a violet green swallow, and we've got a common raven. The raven actually is found throughout the northern hemisphere, all the way from, the UK to Japan, as well as the northern areas of North America. And because we're sort of mountainous in California, they extend down south into California and into Mexico. So they're really broadly, found, while the violet green swallow, for example, is found only on the west coast of North America. And, if you look at the map here of some of the areas that the coastside land, the Pacific Ocean on one side here, and then top is Half Moon Bay. You'll see that there are areas that are being preserved and looked at. The blues are areas that Land Trust has protected, and the green are being protected by other folks, and then the brown are the ones, some of the ones were being worked on. But we have this area of town, we have an area of open country. We also, if you look through up top here, we have creeks like Arroyo going up into Creek that cut mix of sort of suburban, coastline, open country, agriculture, and trees, which are found in those creek areas. There's another creek area down here, down in the south end there. And that mix, so later on, next week, we'll talk a little bit more about birds of the forested areas, and then we'll forth later on in the series. This is sort of the same view, but sort of from above that I was able to find online. You see that you have eucalyptus tree, the open country prairie habitat, coastal prairie, then also the agricultural land and the town itself. So we have a real great mix, as people who live here know. And we're close to the big city, but we're not a big city. Last time I talked about the Finchy birds. These are two that I mentioned, the house finch with the red, this is the male, and the American goldfinch with the yellow. Some people did ask me about a bird that I didn't mention, which is the pine siskin. Now I'm going to go back to this house finch female and recall that they have their salt and pepper face, not much going on the face. They are streaky, so that means that there are sort of stripes heading lengthwise along the body. Moderately slim bird, and it's got a big finchy bill. Remember, the bill is the classic thing to look for in finches, that they're thick, sort of for seed crunching. And that the bill, even though it's big, it has this sort of rounded top. Okay, that's kind of similar. But if you were to see house finch with a pine siskin next to it, the siskin's much, much smaller. It's a little daintier bird. It also has a very, very notched, almost forked tail, if you see them well. And that salt and pepper face, they do have that, but look at the beak. The beak is slimmer, pointier, actually really triangular and pointy. They like small seeds, so they don't eat as big a seed as the house finch. So that's why they have that smaller bill. They really love in feeders the thistle seeds. So if you see this one over here, that's hanging, that sort of sock feeder, that's the kind of feeder that some people use for thistle seed, which is this really slim black seed. And then key for the pine siskin too is that they have these yellow areas right along the wing and at the base of the tail. And they can be pretty bright. Males that have the real bright, and the duller ones are the younger ones and females. So pine siskin can be quite similar, and they move in and out of the area. They're somewhat nomadic, so you will see them sometimes and you won't see them other times. They can be very common in some years, and other years just a few, but they're around right now. So people were asking me about this, so I thought I'd mention them. So all these Finchy birds that we talked about last time, they're commuters. And what I mean is that they don't stick around in one spot all the time in a different area, or go to various different feeding sites. So they're often flying overhead. And when they do, they will give different call notes, like the American goldfinch that has this sort of roller coaster flight. You'll see them kind of going up and down. They do a 3-note call that sometimes, some people say it sounds like potato chip, that they just go potato chip, potato chip, potato chip. So learn these calls, because being commuters and the fact that they call when they fly allows you to watching for them at the feeder. I also mentioned last time the white-crowned sparrow, and here's a white-crowned sparrow that's singing, and then there's a map of Point Reyes on the to the side. And if you see that map of Point Reyes, it has all these names that you might not ever have seen on a map before. Like there's the Buzzy, and then there's the Clear, and there's the Drake. These are all different song types that white-crowned sparrows have, dialects really. And the sparrows is that you sing a specific dialect in a breeding area and no other dialect is found in that area. Then you cross the magic line somewhere and the dialect changes and the males all sing the different dialect on one side of the line versus your side of the line. And I wanted to play you the Half Moon Bay specific dialect, if you can hear this. Hopefully you're hearing that. So that specific dialect you only find in the Half Moon Bay area. So if you're a male and you hatch here and and you learn your song, you will learn your song from all the adjacent males. Now what's odd is if you're a really adventurous Francisco for some reason, you will have to learn the local dialect in order for you to be accepted by the local birds and actually be able to mate. So it's really kind of interesting, that kind of thing that happens with the white-crowned sparrow. Now here's some new species. Black Phoebe. Black Phoebe is a species that is found in the winter more than in the summer, but they're always around. And that will actually wag its tail. It's one of the most obvious things about it is that it's a tail wagger. And you will find in summer, they're more likely to be found in areas that are adjacent to a creek or moist areas or water body, but in winter, they're more widespread. We have more Black Phoebes in winter than in summer. Now, these two are actually both Black Phoebes, and they have slight differences. And I just wanted to show you that you can identify Black Phoebe on the whole by looking at the general look, all dark with a white belly and slight wing bars, maybe some pale on the wing. And puffy little bits on the wing. And then right at the base of the beak, you see that little kind of fleshy orangey bit? That means that it is a young bird. Young birds you can separate sometimes by looking for different coloration, like wing bars, or in this case, even the tips of the feathers on the wing are pale, and then it has this fleshy area. So looking in more detail, you can tell more about this bird. In less detail with birds. Let's see, next one here. Bewick's wren, another bird that will be in backyards or sometimes in the broader area, is a bird that has this pale eyebrow. Look at this bill, very thin, totally unlike a Finchy bird, actually even longer than warblers and some of the other birds, a slight down curve to them. And wrens will show a cocked tail. The tail is almost always sort of held up at an angle, and the more excited they get, the more sort of the tail goes up. And if you see a little brown bird, pale stripe over the eye, and then this tail that goes up, it's Bewick's wren. And Bewick's wrens also have a really varied and beautiful song. So you'll hear all of these songs that sounds like 10 different birds are making them. That's Bewick's wren. And we talked about violet green swallow a little bit earlier, and I'm just going to show you a bit about swallows in general. Violet green is the one that I want to start with because it's the one that nests in a lot of people's houses under the eaves. And one of the key things about especially the males is you look for this white face, and they have this odd name, violet green, because they have a violet bit and a green bit on the back. So if you look at the flying bird, there's there's a green back, and then you go out towards the back, towards the rump, the butt, and it's violet. So it actually does have the two colors, violet and green. And often new birders somehow call it the violent green swallow. And, you know, if you sort of had to, it's such a weird color of green that you could sort of say it is a violent green, because it's not something I would definitely wear. It's a little too green for me. But look at that odd color of green. That doesn't show up all the time. It depends on the light. What does show up, though, is when they fly, they have this white area around the base of the tail, almost like a rump band, and that it shows up really well when they're flying. This is the female. She's a little bit more brown on the face and showing you kind of a typical nesting area. It's going to find something underneath, you know, those eaves or somewhere in there, and it's going to find a hole and get underneath into your roof or some open place in your house. They really love houses. And other swallows that like human-made structures include like the barn swallow with that nest that is mud with an open cup shape, and then the cliff swallow that makes a round nest with a side entrance, almost like an oven, like an old, you know, mud oven. And oops. The mud nests of these two species are always, you know, placed in a human-made structure. Right now, at least in North America, cliff swallows will sometimes be on actual cliffs, but most of North America's cliff swallows nest on bridges. And the barn swallow, you know, as its name implies, are often on barns or sheds or buildings under, you know, houses and so forth. One of the odd things is, like, if you look at barn swallow nests all around North America, 99.9999999% of them are going to be in a human-made structure, which makes you wonder, where did barn swallows nest in the past? And that's a good question. We don't really know. They may have been sort of at the edge of caves or some other sort of natural places that sort of they found eventually to be not as good as barns and houses and so forth. So think about that when you're seeing these birds. Here's a better look at barn swallow, and the way that the tail's really forked, very long, and our barn swallows here in North America have a lot of cinnamon on the underparts. Barn swallows are highly migratory, and if you look at this picture over here on the right, it shows some interesting stuff as far as how the different populations of barn swallows go. And if you look at our West Coast barn swallows, they move south, like our California birds will move south and probably winter in Central America, down in here. Now, the ones that are in the center sort of go into Central America and Northern South America. And then the ones that go in the east, that live in the east, breed in the east, they actually move south and move into South America. So if you put that together, if you live in the east and you're a barn swallow, you migrate farther than a bird that lives in the west. And this applies to all sorts of birds for some reason. It seems like eastern birds versus the western bird migrates less to Central America. The eastern birds tend to migrate more and into South America if they go that far at all. Barn swallows, in fact, I've seen them way down in the Strait of Magellan. So way down in the southernmost part of South America, you can find wintering barn swallows. And this whole idea of different patterns of migration and the fact that also other birds don't migrate at all partially depends on glaciation. So some people have explained that the west versus the east had a very different experience with glaciers, and that's what explains the differences in migration. And we can get into that more later on with questions. I should point out that the questions that I did not get to answer, they were alive. I mean, we answered them on email, and if you received a post talk email last week, there was a link there to get to the questions that were answered after the talk was done. So I'll try to do that again this time. These are a rough-winged swallow and cliff swallow. I showed you the cliff swallow nest, and it has this sort of buffy rump, different looking, very actually quite colorful bird. while the rough-winged swallow that nests on the cliffs right here in town, just by the coast, it's just a brown bird with browner throat, whiter belly. And you think, well, why would you call something a rough-winged swallow? And it's a good question. Some birds are named for something really obvious that they do, or something really obvious about their appearance. But the rough-winged swallow was named by people in a museum. So they had them as specimens, so they were dead, and they were all lined up together, and they said, what's the most obvious thing about this swallow? And somebody said, oh, if you look at the outermost feathers on the wing, rough-winged swallow for a feature that you will never, ever, ever, ever see when the bird is alive and flying around. So keep that in mind in terms of names. Sometimes they're just handles. They're not something that you're going to have to look for in the field. Like I said, you'd hardly ever see a cliff swallow on a cliff, and you're never going to see the rough part of the wing of the swallow. Jays, as we, for some reason, you might not believe this, where I live in my part of Half Moon Bay, I've been here forever, it seems. I've never seen a California scrub jay in my backyard, yet I live. They're a really, really resident species. If they don't, they don't roam around more than their neighborhood, and that's it. So it's completely the opposite of a barn swallow that's flying through across many countries, going to a different continent, flying, thousands of miles, while these guys just hang in their own area where they have food and they know what to find and where to look for it. These are birds in the crow and raven family, and jays, like crows and ravens, are super intelligent. They also hide food. They probably know who puts the cat food out, and who does this and who does that in their neighborhood, and figure out all sorts of ways to find food. California scrub jay doesn't need as big a tree. They can be in shrubby areas. Steller's jays on the right with the crest like trees. So if you have more forest around you, even eucalyptus, you can find Steller's jays. California scrub jays are often in areas near chaparral, or if you have more shrubby bits. California scrub jays are pale underneath, and both jays are blue. They have a lot of blue on them. Steller's jays are dark with this crest. So then one thing, I was gonna say is that, like in anything, every set of groups of people has their pet peeves. And birders, especially sort of birders who've been around a while and they're California birders, one thing that's a pet peeve is, if I go back up to this picture, see, Steller's jay is not stellar, like it's a stellar appearance. It's named for somebody called Steller. So Steller's jay versus Steller jay is one of the pet peeves. I don't know why jays have multiple pet peeves, but this is the other one. This is a blue jay from the east and the north of North America. We don't see blue jays in California. Yet people always say we had a blue jay at the feeder. Now, all of our jays are blue. They have blue on them, but they're not blue jays. So that's sort of one way to think about the fact that nobody really cares if you're right or wrong. But if you're communicating something specific to somebody, especially somebody interested in birds, and you tell them you see a blue jay, they're ready to go get their camera. They're all excited. This is, one of the rare appearances of blue jay in California, but in fact, it's not. It's one of the more common jays that happens to be blue. And so if it looks like the baseball blue jays with the crest and the white around the face, that is the true blue jay. And ours have a different look, with Steller's jay being actually very closely related to the blue jay, but an entirely dark face. There we go. Hooded orioles, mentioned them a bit last time as a backyard bird that will sometimes come to the feeder. And they love these Washingtonia fan palms, and they will take the little yellow strands from the palm and weave these hanging nests like that in the palm. They're completely dependent on these palms for nesting habitat. And in fact, that palm is not native to here. It's from Southern California and Mexico. And when people started bringing the palm north to plant in gardens and in neighborhoods, the Oriole actually came with them. So it's a native bird that has followed a non-native plantation of a tree. So that's kind of interesting to note that some birds are very specific to a food. Other birds are very specific to a certain plant or something they can get from a plant. Like in this case, the palm doesn't provide food for their oriole. It's shelter and what it needs to make the nest. There'll be one talk on raptors towards the end, where we're going to talk about red-tailed hawks and red-shouldered hawks and Cooper's hawks and sharp-shinned hawks and harriers, all those raptors that you see around here. Whoops. Then Cooper's hawk is one of the common ones in the neighborhoods. The neighborhoods provide food for them because they like to eat birds. And in particular, recently, these Cooper's hawks have gotten a real liking for Eurasian collared doves. So if you have collared doves in the area, and we talked, I think last week, somebody asked me whether collared doves were declining in population. I think they are, probably a natural decline, but another bird that is helping that decline of this introduced dove is the Cooper's hawk. And Cooper's hawks are long-tailed, very long-tailed with these bars on them, and the tail has almost a rounded tip. If they're adults, like the one that's more reddish here, they have a real distinct dark cap. And if they're youngsters, they're all streaky underneath. So if you see these two things, they look really different, but in their shape, they actually look very much alike. It's sort of a cylindrical body with a largish head, and then this very long and rounded tail. Quite a different shape from red-tailed hawks and other hawks we'll talk about in a few weeks. But Cooper's hawks are particularly adept at living in neighborhoods. So if you see this that suddenly comes into your yard and scares everything away, and suddenly there's feathers all over the place, it's almost certainly a Cooper's hawk that just ate a bird. And I know it's sad for that bird, but the Cooper's hawk also has to live. It's all part of the cycle of nature, as you know. I have to download a picture of eucalyptus in El Granada somewhere, because I realized that I've never got inspired to take pictures of eucalyptus anywhere. But it's a tree we see all over the place here in California, and especially on the coastside. And it's that way. I'm a real lover of trees, but there's a lot of problems with eucalyptus being from Australia and not having the right types of species to, that can deal with it and so forth. They shed. Well, I won't go much on eucalyptus other than to say that they are habitat for a few species. Most of the great horned owls that we have on the coastside are nesting in eucalyptus groves. So even this one that I took a picture, and you can see the back is a eucalyptus tree. And so local owls at night, the hooting owls, the great horns, they're likely in the eucalyptus or the bigger trees somewhere nearby in your neighborhood. The other one is this little pygmy nuthatch that is climbing up the tree. The nuthatches will sometimes actually go head down or head up, but they climb on trees like this, and they're just looking for anything that they can find in the bark. And the pygmy nuthatch is sort of bluish, gray above with pale below, and they come in little groups. So if you see these little group of birds and they're all kind of crawling up the branches, those are pygmy nuthatches. They really like eucalyptus in our area. They actually like shade, and eucalyptus is one of the few things that provides shade. And same with the Junco that I mentioned last time. Juncos are spreading in our area, and the more big trees that we plant, whether they're eucalyptus or other big trees, provide enough shade for them that they like to nest in these shady areas, live in these shady areas, even though they will feed in much more open areas nearby. As we move to more open agricultural land in town, you'll start seeing blackbirds, like the red-winged blackbird. A few weeks ago, they were really, really prominent, singing and showing their red shoulders. I just wanted to show you this picture because sometimes red wings will almost hide all of the red. And when they're just all black or nearly black, look for their eye color because they're dark-eyed. So if you see a dark blackbird with a pale eye, that's a different species. Um, Here's a red-winged blackbird, a male showing his shoulders. They're called epaulets, and then a female down there. Usually that's what the females do. They ignore them, look the other way, because it's just too much all day going with the epaulets, red and singing and screaming. But it gives you an idea too of how different the males and the females are in this species. And you will sometimes say, well, how come Alvaro always focuses on the males? And I focus on the males often because they're the easier ones to identify, like in the goldfinches, house finches, and so forth. But it's great to actually identify the ones that are easier first, and then learn shapes, behaviors, and then move to the harder to identify females. It's not because I think females are less interesting in their biology or anything. It's just to facilitate understanding. Sometimes you go for the lowest hanging fruit, and it's the males, in this case with a red-winged blackbird. And then I wanted to say Father's Day is coming up, so I made a little happy looking slide and give you an idea that these birds have a very different way of fathering depending on which species they are. So you see these red-winged blackbirds, and we have to also take into account that these are strategies for life in the birds. They're not, we can't give them human, that's a good father, that's a bad father. It's just different in the bird world. So these red-winged blackbirds will defend a territory, and some red-winged blackbirds may have more than one female living within their territory, and then they will mate with those females in the territory, yet the females will leave sometimes and go to feed, but they will mate with other males in other territories. So in any one nest of a red-winged blackbird, most likely the local male will be the father of most of the eggs, but usually at least 1 in 4 eggs is the father is from another area nearby. The California towhee up here up top, he's kind of a real good father. The pairs stay together all year round. They don't migrate. They stick around. They're sort of a pair, and multiple years it'll be the same male and female together. He helps at the nest, not only driving away predators, but actually helping to feed the young. And then hummingbirds, all of the world's hummingbirds, all of them, including our Annas and our Allens, the males do nothing at the nest. They don't help at all. They just breed with the female, and she then goes off, does everything by herself. The male never, ever, ever sees the kids. So 2 birds here, California towhee, Anna's hummingbird that might be in your backyard, both of them totally different in the way that they're fathers. So anyway, happy Father's Day for those of you who are fathers. And we'll also get into a different form of parenting in the blackbird world here in one slide, and that's about the brown-headed cowbird. So here's the brown-headed cowbird. It's an all-dark one with a browner head in the male. Females are grayish. Same with the Brewer's blackbird. The female's grayish. This is the male. They can be nice and shiny looking in good light, and they have the real pale eye. Remember I showed you that red-winged blackbirds can hide the red, but then look at the eye. And if there's the pale eye, if it's a dark eye, it's either a red wing that's hiding the red, or it could be the brown-headed cowbird, but then look for the brown head. And again, females in these 2 blackbirds are uniform and brownish gray. Female of the red-winged blackbird is stripy like a sparrow. But here's the weird thing that the brown-headed cowbird does. And you see, this is a Junco in my backyard feeding this great big chick of a cowbird. Cowbirds lay the eggs in the nests of other species. So in this case, the mother and the father don't ever care for the young. What they do is they use the biology of the Junco that if an egg hatches in its nest, it just assumes it's its own young. Then they will use that biology to trick them into raising the cowbird young. And in many cases, the cowbirds are bigger than the hosts, like in this case. In this situation, this pair of Juncos was successful at feeding a cowbird young as well as one of their own Junco young. A lot of bird people get really upset about cowbirds, saying that they're, driving other birds to extinction and so forth. It's not really the case. In most cases, cowbirds are in balance. Around here, they're in balance. It's often a problem when you have a really rare species that has a very small population. Then you have to watch out for what cowbirds are doing. But in this situation here, cowbirds tend to parasitize California towhees, Oregon juncos, and white-crowned sparrows, 3 species that are quite common and are not showing any sign of decline that I can tell. And in the blackbird vein, we have the European starling as well. They're spotty in winter and they're really shiny like this. In summer, they nest in people's houses too, under the eaves. They'll find some little nook that they can get into in the roof, and they'll nest in there. Now, cool thing about starlings, now they're introduced from Europe. They're not a native bird, but they're here to stay. They've been here for a long, long time. If you look at this individual here on the right, the blue base bill, you see that blue? And then this other one here's got more like a pinky tone to the bill. That's how you tell if they're male or female. And it's really easy. If it's pinky, it's a female. If it's blue, it's a male. Never gonna forget that, are you? It just happened to be that way. But if you look real detail, you'll see that and the starlings. And I sort of left the crows and ravens till the end because it's one of the most common questions I get. How do you tell a crow from a raven? They're both black. And this is one of the situations where it's sort of, as a bird watcher, how are you looking at birds? Are you looking at them just to see color, right? So if the red is missing on the red-winged blackbird, does that confuse you? Because the one thing you're always looking for is the red, rather than shapes and habitat and calls, other things. If you will never be fooled by a red-winged blackbird not showing the red if you've looked at all the other things other than the red when you're looking at red wings. Same thing with crows and ravens. They're very different in size and shape and call, but if you're just looking at color, they're both black. So they're really difficult in terms of coloration. And it's one of the few birds that's sort of a pair of birds that's common where you have to look at shape and size. You're forced to, because there's almost nothing else in many cases that you can look at to separate them. But you see the crow's actually kind of a slimmer, smaller build, daintier thing. Now I took an extreme picture of a raven here. This is like a raven that looks like it's, it's been to Muscle Beach or something. But there is an element of that all ravens show. They are bigger, they're bulkier, they have bigger beaks. And they also have feathers around the throat, especially, that are pointy, so they look almost wet sometimes, like they're sticking out, while the crow looks a little bit more put together at times. And if you see them together, the difference in size is quite notorious. The ravens will also sometimes almost show like they're wearing pants, as if the feathers cover the legs more so than on a crow. Has a longer tip, sort of a longer, almost like a wedge shape rather than just a fan shape. And then look at the fact that the wings are long and pointed, and the little fingers on the tip of the wing are like a hawk. So if you see a blackbird and you say, is that a crow or raven? No, it's a hawk. And then you think, oh no, it isn't a hawk, it's a raven. If it reminds you of a hawk, it's a raven. Also, ravens will play around a lot more in the air and so forth. And here's a crow. This is a bad picture, but the crow is a little bit more stocky, not as long winged. And the tail kept almost fan shaped compared to the raven with the longer tail in the center of the tail, and also the bigger beak and more hawk-like look. Here's another raven with the long, almost hawk-like fingers on the wing. Look at the big beak and also those long tail feathers that give the tail not quite a pointed shape, but almost like a diamond shape rather than a fan. If you listen to them, the classic crow does a call, like caw, 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 and the raven, it's throatier. It's like, crook, crook, crook. You'll hear this kind of throaty, sound, that's a raven. If it's more the straight caw sound, it's a crow. Here's their mug shots. You know, if you have to line them up and say who did it, crow or raven, how the differences in the beak are apparent in the size, and also the feathering on the raven's throat that is pointed so that it almost looks like the feathers are wet or they stick out. They call these hackles, actually. And there's just a bigger beak with a lot more feathering on top of the beak. And here on the coast, on the coastal trail, the ravens are very tame, so you can get some real close views of them like this. This is from the coastal trail. And then, you know, in the fields too, you will sometimes see herons. I know people point this out a lot, and even egrets in the middle of the field away from the water. We always think of the great blue heron and great egret as being water birds, and they usually are. But here, these guys are smart. They've figured out that if they hang out in fields, they can catch voles and gophers. So instead of trying to catch frogs and fish in a pond, they will just use the same method, sit and wait for something to come by their feet, and then they'll grab it. And they're actually really good at gopher and vole population control. So if you ever see a heron in the middle of the field, you'll see this around the Half Moon Bay Airport, you'll see it south of town and so forth. They're actually looking for rodents rather than fish or frogs. They're both big. Both of the egret and the heron are really big. Great egrets are always white with a yellow beak. And we have another egret around here, the snow egret, that has a black beak, and they're always in water. You won't find snow egrets in the middle of the field. And the great blue heron is dark, kind of bluish gray with white and stripes and this and that. And it's the only big dark heron, like I'm talking really big, that we see in the area. At Ocean Colony, right at the entrance, there's, especially in the non-breeding season, a nice nighttime roost of great egrets. So if you want to see that sometimes, it's kind of interesting to see them all come in to sleep there. I think probably 10, 15 of them will sleep together in that area. So next time, I'm going to talk more about foresty birds, or maybe if you went to Burley Murray Ranch State Park, what you'd see there, the warblers, wren tits, other things. We'll repeat some of the birds. You know, if you have, you know, we haven't mentioned spotted towhee, song sparrow yet. We'll talk about that. Like I said, this sort of free form thing, and I don't always get to every bird, and I sort of try to show you a few things, give you an idea, and sometimes we'll talk about some other birds that we haven't next time, and we'll repeat some of the other ones this time. All right, let's get to some questions. I know that some people are saying that the sound was cutting out. I couldn't do anything about it here from my end. We'll try to fix that up before next time. Didn't seem to be a problem last time, so I really apologize for that. Wanted to say that, you know, the boat trips start out of Pillar Point Harbor this July 18th, if anybody's interested, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in this next slide here. Apparently, the record number blue whale sightings they'd ever counted off of the Farallon Islands happened this week. I think it's 40-something blue whales that we're seeing from the Farallon Islands. We're hoping that sort of they stick around. Friends of mine that were doing fishing off of kayaks, off of Pacifica, we're seeing blue whales. So I think they're actually close to shore too. So if you're around, out and about, Pillar Point Bluffs, maybe look out there from, you know, Montara, and see if you see a long blow, like the blow of a blue whale is really, really tall and like a column, especially even when there's wind, it just goes straight up because they're so powerful. People describe it almost like a fire hydrant, you know, that just sort of shot up. That's how much water goes up from a blue whale. They so it happens to be a really great year for the ocean. There seems to be a lot of krill out there. There's a lot of activities of humpbacks as well as blue whales, and a lot of birds that the people who are fishing are seeing offshore. So hopefully we'll be able to see some of that when we get out on our trips. Let me see here, some questions. Oh, male swallows are more iridescent than female swallows. Do they have different or less of feather structures that make them iridescent? This is a really good question. This bird there that I'm showing you is a pheasant from Bhutan, one of the trips we do in Asia, and it's called a monal, Himalayan monal. And that blue coloration on the back isn't actually blue pigmentation. And in the iridescence, the shiny bit on the neck is actually not pigmentation either. What I mean is that there aren't colored bits like the flamingo or the house finch that color those feathers. It's sometimes in blue specifically, it's just the way that the microstructures of the feather reflect the light. So it's almost like little crystals made by feather bits that, you know, make that coloration of blue. It's not blue colors that the bird has to ingest or that it puts on the feathers. It's the actual structure of the feathers. And iridescence is the same kind of thing. And sometimes iridescence can be mixed with pigment and the structure. So it can be even more complicated. So the question was, do the males, being more iridescent, have more feather structures to make them iridescent? Yeah, they actually have more well-developed structures to give that blue, shiny coloration. And somebody says, see a barn swallow in places far from structures. So do they range far from the nesting locations? Yeah, they do. Actually, when they're foraging, they can be miles away from the nesting area. One of the best barn swallow, you know, sort of nesting spots I ever saw was on a ferry in Lake Ontario that went back and forth to this island called Amherst Island. In it was Wolf, it doesn't matter. One of the islands. This ferry had a nesting barn swallow, and the birds actually flew near the ferry and followed it back and forth all day. And at night, you know, when the ferry would park, they would just sleep, and then next day they would follow it back and forth. So they actually were able to deal with a moving nest, and barn swallows will actually range quite far when they have to. I've seen that violet green swallows, on days like today is kind of cold and gloomy, I see fewer violet green swallows than on days that are sunny. And I think what happens is that even though they nest here, they're probably flying over the hill to eat, and then, you know, coming back later on, or with food for the young or what have you. It seems like a lot to do, but even the terns, you'll see them, they actually use the Highway 92 corridor, the Caspian terns nest on the bayside. They come out here to fish, and you'll see them actually flying back over 92 with a little fish in their beak. So they will do that long flight just to give one fish to their mate or to their young. Swallows aren't that extreme, but know more about the effect of glaciers on eastern versus western birds. Yeah, it's a complicated situation because we didn't just have one glaciation, we had multiple over, you know, tens of thousands of years. But in essence, what in the West, there were probably more places that were glacier free that were called refugia than in the East. And also in the East, once you got far enough south, you got into the southeastern United States, there was nowhere else to go. Here, further south, we were connected to all of this land in Guatemala, Mexico, Central America. So in fact, a lot of our populations of Western birds seem to have been derived originally from Central American Guatemalan species. The very Juncos that we talked about, the oldest relative of the Junco lives in Guatemala and one in Costa Rica, and then the whole other thing sort of, they expanded north after a certain time. And they probably really, that last expansion happened after the last glaciation or the last few glaciations. So it's complicated, but it has to do with where the refugia that were glacier free were and how much land they had to move north and south once you know, sort of think about it that way. Let me see here. Introduction of non-native plant species. How much has that changed the kind of birds we see on the coast? That's actually a really good question. But let me put it to you this way, how we've changed the situation. There's a bird, well, there's the roadrunner, right, which is a bird you might have seen in cartoons, but maybe you've seen it as a desert bird if you've gone down to the desert. Roadrunners used to exist all the way up into San Jose, up into Redwood City, it seems, even perhaps. And in that Redwood City area, also, there were other sort of not quite desert birds, but chaparral, dry chaparral birds like the bell sparrow. And they used to exist there. And we're talking, in the 20s, 30s. And what has happened is a lot of that, even though there's still chaparral bits around there, by having all of these neighborhoods and people and watering, and we've changed the entire water regime on the other side of the hill. So it's a lot moister on the other side of the hill now than it was historically before we started irrigating. And we put in a lot of non-natives and all sorts of other things. So now it's not. And so that's one idea of not only have we changed things from the plants we plant, but also we've changed things by how we move the water around. So in general, the native plant species especially are really good for native insects. So native plantings in your backyard are good for getting a wider variety of bees and insects and so forth. And the birds know what to do with them because they're used to them. That's not to say that there are some non-natives that birds actually like, but we try to keep that quiet. What are good, last time, binocular questions. I did in the last week, I did answer some questions about binoculars in that, and maybe we'll put the links up. I use a company called Kowa from Japan, and they have various lines of binoculars. And cost, if you're talking expensive binoculars, they're above $2,000. So that's expensive binoculars. Cheaper binoculars, you can get a binocular, and maybe not recommended. But in the $200 range, the $300, there are actually some pretty nice, binoculars in terms of clarity and durability and so forth. But just know that with binoculars, when you pay more money, you are getting better glass, and also the coatings on the glass are better for allowing you to see true colors. So there is an element too, once you get into the higher end binoculars, some of them are just pricey because it's a status symbol. So keep that in mind. So there's a middle of the road there, and maybe we'll send those links out again. Red-winged blackbirds chasing red-tailed hawks, ravens, and crows. Oh yeah, Brewer's blackbirds, red-winged blackbirds are really, really keen on defending their nesting areas against bigger birds like crows, ravens, and hawks. And just now we're still in that season where you'll see them almost riding the back of the raven, and it's mostly the males, but sometimes the females and the red-winged blackbirds that will get in there and try to attack these birds. And they're not trying to hurt them, they're just trying to get them to go away, because a big predator is just danger for them. And there's levels of this. So you will sometimes have a crow chasing a red-tailed hawk, and sometimes you will have a blackbird chasing a crow. But the one bird that it doesn't care who it's chasing, it'll chase. If it wants to chase, it'll chase is the hummingbird. Anna's hummingbirds will chase no matter what size. And I'll show you a picture next time. I'll try to remember to get that, the bold Anna's hummingbirds. And I think it's not just that they're aggressive and bold. I really do feel like if hummingbirds were the size of ravens, we wouldn't be able to go outside because we would be in such danger. So we're lucky that they're only tiny little things. But I think them move so slowly that nothing is really quite dangerous, no matter how big they are or how ferocious they are. So keep that in mind. Yeah, it is, you see that a lot right now, and it'll stop very quickly. Once we get into July, you won't see the chasing anymore. There's no need to do it. There's no more nesting, or nesting slowed down. So, oh, somebody was asking, they weren't here last week, and that I mentioned, my book, The Birds of California, it's apparently out of stock in many places. So they're reprinting very soon, I was told, but maybe in a few months. So if you find one, they might be the last for the while. So it's the field guide to the birds of California with photographs. It's the American Birding Association field guide. Otherwise, you know, there's apps and books like the Sibley Guide, National Geographic Guide are very good North America-wide guides to use for bird identification. And it depends on whether you like a book or you like an app. Apps have the sounds and so forth. But sometimes a book is way nicer to just go through and see all that is there. In an app, I always feel like you don't quite know what you aren't seeing in the app. You know, a book, you can see exactly all that's there in one go, and then and that's useful for me. Somebody's asking if the cowbird is native, and it is. Cowbirds are native species, so they've changed in how common they are depending on how we've altered environments. So maybe in some aren't as common as they are today, but around here they are native. And again, I do apologize if somehow the internet's going spotty this time, this week. We'll try to fix that and for next week. So cowbirds, do they also learn which species are best to parasitize? And nobody really knows much about cowbirds and their learning behavior for hosts and so forth, but it does seem like a certain female might have some species that it lays in more likely than others. I don't know if that's because they're the easiest to find as far as nests, but I studied cowbirds actually when I was a grad student, and there's some really crazy situations going on, especially in South America with cowbirds and mimicry, where one cowbird will actually look like another species and sound like another species. We don't quite get that here, but there are a lot of aspects of cowbird biology that seem like maybe impossible, but maybe it is possible. One thing is that these kid cowbirds never see their parents, ever. They don't know their parents. But once they leave their hosts and they get into a flock of cowbirds, most of the time, the ones that are known and banded and so forth, the young are in a flock that includes their mother. So you wonder if somehow they know who their mom is, or their mom knows who the young is, or there's some genetic thing or something that they know who's who. But it's just, there's no explanation for how they would be more likely to be with their mother than with just a random set of cowbirds. So I think we're getting to a couple more minutes. I'll just do, let's see. Somebody's asking, is there a name for the castanets sound that the crows make, or its purpose? Ravens do all sorts of weird sounds, and crows do all sorts of weird sounds, and they're so clever, intelligent. They all know their neighborhood crows, everybody. They're doing things at almost the level of a wolf society, or almost human society. So who knows what they're doing, but it could be actually quite meaningful. They might be telling stories about who they are, what they did, for all we know. We don't know enough about crows and ravens, but some of these special sounds that aren't just the cawing, they seem to do only at certain times, often when they're really mellow, and maybe they're communicating something completely different, but that we don't know. All right, I think probably time to wrap up, is it? And we'll get to the other questions next time. And sorry, okay.
Thank you very much again, Alvaro, for this. Is great, and thanks for all that you shared during this time. And thank you all for being here and for your patience with internet connectivity issues. It can be a bear here on the coast. sometimes it can be difficult, but we are going to be running some diagnostics for next time, and hopefully things we will be able to improve. It did improve as it went along. So thank you for those of you, for the 200 and some of you that have stuck with us. We're grateful for you sticking around. It shows that you're committed to hearing all that Alvaro's been sharing. We will be receiving a follow-up email in the next day or so, just sharing with you a link to a video. So if you didn't get to see part of it, if you are having your own specific issues, connectivity issues, then you can click on that. That'll be on our blog, but we'll give you the connection to that. Also, if you want to check out our blog, just to check out some of the other things that are going on there, you can hop on our website, coastsidelandtrust.org, and take a look at the upcoming webinars. Next week, Alvaro is going to be talking about songbirds specifically, so it should be a great one to attend. Also, of course, we put a link to Alvaro's Adventures. I know most of you know him, but for those of you who are who are new to him, you can check him out at alvaro'sadventures.com. Let's see, if for those of you who have, many of you seeing you all next week at the Songbirds. Oh, look, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Maybe we broke the internet. It's gotten so popular, huh?
That's it. And if any of you are having your own independent issues too, I think sometimes on the coast it's just tricky. So we're working together. We're a community. We're working at it. So anyway, thank you all for being here. Thank you, Alvaro.
Thank you.